On the morning they put her out, a young woman of 20 stood on the steps of a house that had never truly been hers, holding nothing but a cracked jewelry box and a name she wasn't sure she still belonged to. What was hidden beneath the velvet lining of that box didn't just stun her, it dismantled everything she thought she understood about love and about loss and about what a person is truly worth. If you've ever felt discarded, if you've ever been told you were a burden before you were told you were a person, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The day I turned 20, Diana handed me a garbage bag. Not a moving box, not a suitcase, a black plastic garbage bag, the kind you'd use for lawn clippings, and she held it out with two fingers the way you'd hold something already dirty. I remember thinking how theatrical it was, how she had clearly been rehearsing this moment for months, maybe longer. She didn't say happy birthday. She didn't look at me when she spoke. She said, "Your grandmother left you something in the back closet. You can take it and go." I was 20 years old, standing in the hallway of a house I'd lived in since I was 11, and I had been reduced to what fit in a garbage bag: 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, a worn paperback copy of a novel I'd read so many times, the spine had split clean in half, a photograph of my grandmother and me taken when I was 7, her hands on my shoulders, both of us squinting into the same summer sun. That was everything. That was my life compressed into 32 gallons of black plastic. The sky outside was the color of old pewter. November had come in hard that year, the kind of cold that doesn't just chill you, it humiliates you. I pulled my coat tighter and stood on that porch for a moment longer than I needed to. I don't know what I was waiting for her to call me back, for some small mercy to land. Neither came. The back closet had smelled of cedar and old perfume and something underneath both of those things, something that was just my grandmother, just Eleanor. I'd pressed my face into her cardigans as a child and breathed that smell and felt entirely safe. Standing in there that last time, I breathed it again and felt the opposite of safe. I felt the way a person feels when they realize a door they always assumed was open has been quietly locked behind them. On the shelf, sitting between a broken umbrella stand and a box of Christmas ornaments no one had hung in years, was the jewelry box. It was small, maybe 8 inches wide, 6 inches deep, dark wood, lacquered once, now dull and dry. The lid was cracked along the left hinge, a hairline fracture that ran like a fault line across the grain. A small brass clasp held it shut. The brass had gone green at the edges. Diana had watched me pick it up from the doorway of the closet. "Junk," she said, "but it was listed in the will as yours, so." She said it the way people say things they've already decided don't matter. I didn't open it on the porch. I didn't open it on the bus. I just held it on my lap for 3 hours and watched the city go by through fogged glass, and I tried very hard not to feel anything at all. I had no idea the cracked, worthless box in my hands was about to change everything. The lawyer's name was Arthur Abernathy, and his office was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled perpetually of old paper and furniture polish. The will had named him as the executor. I'd received a letter from him 3 days before Diana threw me out, a precise, careful letter on ivory stationery, asking me to come in at my earliest convenience. I almost hadn't gone. I nearly convinced myself it was a formality, that there was nothing left, that whatever Eleanor had once owned had long since been absorbed into Diana's world, cataloged and claimed and converted into something that did not include me. He was a small man, Mr. Abernathy, with thin white hair combed neatly to one side and glasses he looked at me over rather than through. He did not offer condolences. He unfolded a document on the desk between us and smoothed it once with his palm the way you'd smooth a tablecloth, slow and deliberate. "Your grandmother," he said, his voice like gravel stirred with a spoon, "left you a parcel of land in Elton County, 45 acres, a farmhouse, or what remains of one, outbuildings, a creek that runs along the eastern edge of the property." I stared at him. 45 acres. The property taxes are 8 years in arrears. He looked at me over his glasses. The back taxes total $4.11 per year, compounded. You can settle the full balance for $4. $4. I had 14 in my wallet. He folded his hands. I should also tell you that a company called Summit Creek Estates has been attempting to acquire this property for the past 3 years. They made your grandmother an offer of $8,000 before she passed. She refused them every time. He paused. They have already reached out to me since the will was filed. They are now offering you $10,000. $10,000. I thought about a deposit on an apartment. I thought about a winter coat that wasn't threadbare at the elbows. I thought about what it would feel like to sleep somewhere and know I would still be there in the morning, that no one could hand me a garbage bag with 2 fingers and change the entire shape of my life. Where is it? I said. The property. About 90 miles north, a town called Harlan Creek. Is there a road to it? A dirt road, passable in dry weather. He paused. The farmhouse has not been maintained. I would not mislead you about its condition. I sat with that for a moment. I looked at the $4 on the desk between us. He had placed them there as if I would need to see them, as if the smallness of the number was part of the information. I'm not selling, I said. The words came out before I had thought them through. Something older than reason said them. Something that knew Eleanor's hands on my shoulders and the smell of her cedar closet. It's mine. I want to see it. It was the most impulsive thing I had ever done. It was the right decision of my life. The bus to Harlan Creek left from the depot on 5th at 6 in the morning. I sat in the back with the garbage bag wedged between my feet and the jewelry box in my lap, and watched the city unspool into suburbs, and then into farmland, and then into the kind of country that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives, quietly, while you're not paying attention. Trees thickened on either side of the road, hills folded up around the highway. The air, even through the sealed windows of the bus, felt different, colder, cleaner, like it hadn't been breathed by a million people before it reached me. I stopped at a payphone at the Harlan Creek gas station. His name was Henry, the attendant, old and spare with the careful economy of movement that comes from decades of physical work. He pointed me toward the property without being asked. He'd recognized the name when I said it. Eleanor Vance's granddaughter? He set down his rag and looked at me properly. Your grandmother was a good woman. Stubborn as a mule in a thunderstorm, but good. He paused. Those Summit Creek people were in here 6 months ago, asking questions about the water table. That kind of question. He said it the way people say things that mean more than they seem to. I didn't know what to do with that yet. The property was 2 miles down a dirt road that had gone soft from recent rain, and the mud pulled at my boots with every step. When I finally came around the bend in the tree line and saw the farmhouse, my chest dropped. It was worse than I'd imagined. The porch sagged at a 30-degree angle on the left side. 2 windows on the ground floor were gone, covered in plastic sheeting that had gone opaque with age. The roof, what remained of it, was dark with moss and buckled in the center. The paint, once white I guessed, had peeled back to bare wood on every exposed surface. I stood at the edge of the yard for a long moment and thought seriously about turning back. The mud, the cold, the $10,000, the apartment deposit. I thought about Eleanor's hands on my shoulders. I walked toward the front door. The lock was old and stiff, and the key, the small brass key Mr. Abernathy had included in an envelope, resisted for a long, grating moment. Then there was a loud, protesting screech of metal on metal, and then a solid, satisfying clunk. The lock gave. The door swung open. A wave of air rolled out over me, musty and thick, smelling of damp earth and rust and trapped time, and beneath those things, so faint I almost missed it, something like lavender. Like my grandmother. I stepped inside. The light came through gaps in the boarded windows and long, angled shafts, full of dust motes that spun slowly in the disturbed air. The interior was larger than the outside had promised. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen through a low doorway, stairs going up into darkness. The floorboards were warped but intact. The ceiling had held everywhere but one far corner. I stood in the center of it and turned slowly. My footsteps echoed, and then I looked at the mantel. On the mantel above the cold fireplace, sitting precisely in the center the way something placed by deliberate hands sits, was a wooden crate, small, pine-slatted, the kind used for shipping fruit decades ago. It had been placed there on purpose. It had been placed there for me. I crossed the room. My hands were shaking by the time I lifted the lid. Inside, straw, old, dry packing straw. I pushed my hands through it and felt the hard curve of glass beneath my palms. I pulled out a mason jar. Inside it, rolled tight and bound with a rubber band so old it had fused to the paper, was a stack of bills. I pulled another jar, then another, and another, until 5 jars stood on the hearth in a row, each one packed with rolled currency. I opened one bundle. $20 bills. I counted one roll slowly, my lips moving. $1,000. 5 jars, multiple rolls per jar. My mind would not process the arithmetic. It kept sliding off the number the way a hand slides off something wet. I sat down hard on the cold stone floor, my back against the fireplace. I sat there for a long time. Then a sound came out of me that I didn't plan, a strange, choked sound that wasn't quite laughter and wasn't quite anything else, and it echoed off the walls of that hollow room. And then the choked sound shifted, and I pressed my hands over my face and I cried. Not quietly, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and structural, the kind that has been waiting a very long time to happen. When I finally lifted my head, my face was wet and the room had gone dimmer. Late afternoon, I looked back into the crate. Beneath the last layer of straw, something else caught the light. I reached in, the jewelry box, not the cracked one from Diana's closet, a second one, older, smaller, made of rosewood, the velvet interior perfectly intact, deep burgundy and soft as something living. Inside it, folded into quarters and pressed flat beneath a cameo brooch I'd never seen before, was a letter. The handwriting was Eleanor's. I would have known it anywhere. It said, Sarah. I smoothed the paper open on my knee. My dearest Sarah, it began. If you are reading this, it means you found your way to Harlan Creek. It means you are braver than you know. It means I am gone, and I am sorry I could not tell you this in person. I tried many times, and something always stopped me. I was afraid. Old women are not supposed to be afraid, but we are, more than anyone knows. I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 hour of one day since the morning your mother brought you home. You have her eyes. You have always had her eyes. But you have something she never quite found. You have the stubbornness to stay. I need you to know why I did not fight harder to keep you when your father remarried. It was not because I didn't want to. The opposite is true. Diana threatened a legal challenge. She had a lawyer, and I had nothing, and the court had already ruled against me once. She told me that if I contested the arrangement, she would have me declared mentally unfit, and she would ensure you were placed in the system, rather than with me. She knew I was afraid of what that would mean for you. She used that fear like a key. I chose to let you go because the alternative was worse. I have regretted it every day since. The money in the crate is from 40 years of careful living. Do not let anyone tell you what to spend it on. But the money is not the most important thing. Read this carefully, Sarah. The creek on the eastern edge of this property sits above one of the largest freshwater aquifers in the county. A geological survey done quietly at my own expense in 1987 confirmed it. I have never filed it publicly. I have never told anyone. The deed to these water rights is registered under a land trust in my name. As of the day of my death, that trust transfers entirely to you. Summit Creek Estates has been trying to acquire this land for 3 years because they know there is water here. They don't know how much. When they find out how much, they will offer you more than you can imagine. Do not sell. Not 1 acre. Not 1 drop. The foundation is the key, Sarah. Everything else is built on what you choose to put at the bottom. The letter was signed the way she signed everything. No flourish, just Eleanor. Clear and unhurried as the woman herself. I read it 3 times. I read the 4th paragraph twice on its own, out loud in the empty room. My voice sounded strange in the hollow space, old and new at the same time. I folded the letter back along its creases and held it against my chest and sat with the sound of the creek outside and the dust motes settling in the fading light. His final line was underlined twice. The foundation is the key. The next weeks were a blur of cold and labor and learning. I slept in a sleeping bag on the warped floorboards the first 3 nights, then spent $4.11 settling the back taxes at the county clerk's office. The woman behind the counter looked at the receipt and then at me and didn't say anything, but she stamped it with more force than was strictly necessary, and I took that as a good sign. George at the hardware store in Harlan Creek let me buy supplies on credit. He didn't say much. He just wrote the amounts in a small notebook with a stub of pencil and waved me off when I tried to explain the situation. A retired carpenter named Walt showed up one afternoon without explanation, looked the roof over with a slow professional eye, and came back the next morning with a truck full of materials and two nephews. He refused payment. He said only Eleanor brought food to my wife every day for 6 months when she couldn't get out of bed. We're square. Martha from the diner sent over a box of kitchen things: pots, a cast iron pan, mismatched cutlery, a set of plates that didn't match but held heat. The work was real and physical in a way I had never experienced. I chopped wood until my hands blistered and then healed, and blistered again. I hauled water in buckets from the creek before the pump was fixed. I sanded floors on my hands and knees with paper I bought by the roll. I patched plaster. I cleaned the stone fireplace with a wire brush until the smoke draft ran clean. At the town library, I read everything I could find on water rights and aquifer law. I read about conservation easements. I read about land trusts. I read with the focused hunger of someone who knows that the thing they're learning is the only thing standing between them and losing everything again. The first letter from Summit Creek Estates arrived in week 3. $30,000. I put it on the mantel next to the mason jars and kept working. The second letter came 2 weeks later. Their language had changed. Words like eminent domain appeared. Words like blight designation. I made copies of both letters and filed them with Mr. Abernathy. Then they requested a meeting. I walked into the lawyer's office on the Tuesday morning in January, and the 2 men waiting for me were wearing suits that cost more than my grandmother's back taxes combined. They smiled when I came in, both of them, the kind of smiles that don't start in the eyes. They talked for a while. They talked about community benefit and regional development and the economic vitality of Harlan Creek. They used the word partnership 4 times in 5 minutes. I counted. Then the older one opened a folder. We're prepared to offer you $280,000 for the property and all associated rights. The room was very quiet. I looked at the number on the paper. I looked at my hands, which were rough now from the work, the knuckles cracked at the edges, a thin line of wood stain along my right thumb that wouldn't fully wash out. I thought about the cold stone floor and the way the mason jars had caught the light. I thought about Eleanor's hands on my shoulders. The summer sun. The foundation is the key, Sarah. No, I said. The younger one started to speak. I raised one hand. I'm not selling the property or the water rights, I said, but I've spoken with an attorney who specializes in water law. There is a framework, a lease and easement arrangement, that I'm willing to discuss. A 20-year lease on limited water extraction. The rate is structured annually with fixed increases. Harlan Creek residents get priority water rates, locked in for the full term. There is a conservation covenant on the aquifer recharge zone. No surface development within 300 feet of the creek. A community trust receives 10% of the annual lease fees. I paused. Those are the terms, all of them. Not a negotiation. If Summit Creek wants access to this water, this is how it happens. Neither of them said a word. I'll give you 2 weeks to respond, I said. I stood up and picked up my bag. Thank you for your time. I walked out of that office and down 3 flights of stairs and out onto the January street, and the cold air hit my face like a hand. And I stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in and thought, Eleanor would have liked that. They agreed to every term. The contract was signed on a Wednesday afternoon in February, and by the time I drove back to Harlan Creek, the late sun was sitting low and orange behind the hills, and the dirt road had dried enough to take the truck straight through without fighting the mud. I pulled up to the house and sat in the truck for a moment. The porch no longer sagged. Walt's nephews had rebuilt it in November. Level, solid new pine planks that would weather to gray in a few years and look like they'd always been there. The windows were in. The paint was fresh. Smoke rose from the chimney in a straight, unhurried line. I got out and walked up the porch steps and put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly now, no protest, and pushed the door open and reached in and flipped the switch. The light came on. Real electricity, running through walls that were mine, in a house that was mine, on 45 acres of land that sat above an aquifer that was mine, left to me by a woman who had loved me every day of her life even when she could not say it out loud. I stood in the doorway for a long time. On the mantel where the pine crate had sat the day I arrived, there was now just the rosewood jewelry box. Small, clean, the velvet interior still that deep burgundy that caught the light. Beside it, in a frame I'd found in town and cleaned up with a soft cloth, was the photograph. Eleanor and me. 7 years old, both of us squinting into the same summer sun. Her hands on my shoulders. I stand on this porch now sometimes, in the mornings especially, with the creek sounds coming up through the trees and the light moving slow across the fields. I stand here and I think about the word thrown, about how a person can be thrown out like something broken and land if they are very lucky and very stubborn, somewhere that was always meant to hold them. I think about what Eleanor hid under the velvet, not just the letter, not just the deed, something harder to name, the knowledge that someone had seen me, even from a distance, that someone had planned for me, that I was worth planning for. The most valuable things are often hidden beneath layers of damage and time. That's what this place taught me. You cannot always see them at first. Sometimes you have to push past the cracked lid, past the dry straw, past the first wave of damp and rust, and trust that what was placed there for you is still waiting. If you've ever been handed a garbage bag instead of a future, if you've ever stood on a porch in November and wondered whether anyone in the world had left a light on for you, you are not alone in that. You never were. What is the thing in your life, the cracked and overlooked and undervalued thing, that might be waiting for you to open it? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. Thank you for listening.